Ladies and gentlemen, you know what it is, Hip Hop Mike. I'm very excited about this interview for a couple of reasons. Clearly, everything that's going on has started a lot of conversation, and I've been really vocal about it, but I want to make clear in a very different way than I think a lot of people are. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce the guest, Steven Gates, who's played a role in a lot of different divisions of the police department. How are you, man?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm good. I can't complain. I've had a lot of friends come at me for my comments on the police, and I've had a lot of people tell me I'm doing a great job for, I think, the wrong reasons. So I was looking forward to speaking to an officer, somebody that actually knows more of the ins and outs. I guess to give you some background on me, I've lived all over the place. I grew up between, different neighborhoods in Queens. I lived in Marine Park, Brooklyn, which is like, let's say I've been in situations where people hate police, and I've been in situations where a lot of people are police. And to make it clear, right off the bat, I don't think that police officers are bad people. I want to make that very clear. I think a lot of people say if you're a cop, you can't be a good person, and that's it. And I know from firsthand that's not the case at all. Some of my favorite people are police officers. My argument has been on Instagram is that I haven't met many good cops. And my reasoning for that is because I think as a police officer, in my assumption, you have a responsibility to do what's right at the end of the day by any means necessary. I understand that that is a very, broad statement, and there's a lot of blurry lines, and there's a lot of situations. Like, for example, me in radio, there's times where I've been told you need to play these records, and I didn't want to play the records, but you play them because you don't want to lose your job and deal with drama. And I think for a police officer, it's 10 times worse. So I wanted to really talk to police officers and kind of get more of a perspective from their end, because I think the conversations could be really productive, number one. And number two, I think that there's a very big disconnect. I think that, the people in the hood, they're just like, cops are bad. And again, some of the people that I've met in Marine Park whose parents are detectives for years and years are like they've been some of the kindest people to me. So I guess to start it off, let people, I guess, know a little bit about your background and what are your thoughts on everything that's been going on with, like, the social injustice and like the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that.
I'm born and raised in Brooklyn. I was born and raised in Park Slope. Lived in Marine Park myself. That's pretty much, Park Slope and Marine Park. I come from a long line of police family members. My dad, my brother, my sister-in-law, 3 uncles, a few cousins, about 12 or 15 of us that have been through law enforcement. So I come from, a family of law enforcement. Also growing up, I wasn't an angel, you know what I mean? I've had my dealings with the police as a kid. I decided to take, the city test and I took sanitation, I took the fire department, but my goal was to be a cop like my dad and a detective. And, my point too is that I still remain friends with some of my, with some of the guys I grew up with who have been in prison, who have had bad contacts with cops. I visited friends in prison. And, they've been roughed up by the police, and it's amazing. There's quite a few of them that still say they support the police, even though, they might have gotten roughed up. It might be old school way of thinking. Like back when I was a kid, if you got smacked by a cop, you went home. And if you told your father would smack you for getting hit by the cop. There was no question in authority. I understand now that, things have changed, it can't hurt to question authority. It can't hurt to ask an officer if he's stopping you, why you're being stopped. As far as the BLM is concerned, that was based on, I believe, the Michael Brown case, which that cop was exonerated. 3 Black independent witnesses, a Black mayor. Most of the jury was Black, and it was proven that he acted in self-defense. And then they started killing cops. In Dallas, they killed 6 cops based on the BLM. So that movement, and, like I said, some of your viewers are going to disagree, but that movement is basically like what the BLA was, the Black Liberation Army was in the 70s, was execute cops. You just don't, listen, that cop was found not guilty. He acted in self-defense. 3 independent Black witnesses, a Black mayor, predominantly Black town. And, the BLM still wants answers. And, they've been proven, with the violence that they have done and the rioting, that they're not peaceful. Like, No one has done more for Black lives than cops, and that includes Black cops. I worked in Red Hook for 15 years, man. People were happy to see me. Black people, Hispanic people. You know, I worked in the projects most of the time because let's be honest, that's where most of the crime occurred, and that's what they wanted us. They did not want us to be there. You know, someone got shot on their block. No one wanted to, you know, to be a witness because we know what happens to the witnesses. So we were fighting a battle by ourselves. And, you know, that being said, there was always a hatred for police, and there always will be. And the majority of the people who hate cops, in my 15 to 20 years experience, was usually because they've had you know, a bad background with crime. They've been arrested. Let me tell you something. When I was 15 years old, I didn't like cops either. My father was a cop. My brother was a sergeant. I didn't like cops either, man. I grew up a little bit. I became a cop. I saw the other side. And, you know, I had a pretty good reputation on the street as being a fair guy. I've worked with cops. The majority of cops are good people, man. There is always going to be, and it has been in the past. You know, I've dealt with cops. We used to deal with shit one-on-one in the locker room. If a cop acted up, if he did something stupid, we used to like fight, bro. No joke. Let's go outside. Let's go up on the roof and handle this because I don't like the way you spoke to my prisoner. Or you shouldn't have spoke to the lady that way. We would flip lockers over, teach guys lessons. You know, it was an old school way of thinking, man. You know, like, but nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. You know, I'll say that for sure.
Let me all right, I have a couple things to say about what you said. There's a lot that I agree with, but there's also some things that I think you're a little closed-minded on, in my opinion, and respect, with the most respect.
Okay.
The same way you say, there's police officers that'll flip lockers if there's a cop that's doing something wrong. That good cops hate bad cops more than anybody. There's the same thing within the Black Lives Matter movement. There's a lot of people that are part of that movement that the same way that the Black Lives Matter might have been built on something that could have been exactly what you said it was. It's black jury, black, you know, that happens across the board all the time. Police department, Black Lives Matter. But there's still a handful of people, no matter what the group is, that are going to be good and that are going to be bad. It doesn't matter if you're in gangs, if you're at a barbershop, if you're on a radio station, if you're a police officer, if you're Black Lives Matter or any other movement. There's always going to be a handful that are shit, and there's going to be a handful that are great. So my first thing is just to pin the movement as a whole as something that's anti-cop, I think is a injustice to the movement. The same way that I'll say to the movement, anybody that's part of that thinks that all cops are bad is out of their fucking mind. And this is a big reason why I wanted to speak with you today, because again, I think I'm somebody who bridges that gap very well. I've marched with Black Lives Matter. I've been part of tons of events with the police department, with a lot of my friends where we go to the VA. We've done all kinds of different shit. And I've been treated very well by cops. I've been treated very well by people in Black Lives Matter. So I think to pin the group as a whole on either side is an issue. That being said, where I find, I think the difference is that police officers I look to be a little more mature, to take the higher road. I don't expect a lot from Black Lives Matter. And I don't mean that in a way where I don't expect them to speak on what they care about and what they stand for. To be honest, I think that Black Lives Matter could be a little bit more direct in exactly what it is that they expect, and not as broad as they've been. The rioting, I think everybody could agree, is complete bullshit. And anybody that's looting out there is out of their fucking minds. And it dilutes everybody's life. Honestly, it's bad for their movement, for the people that do have a good intention behind that movement. And it's terrible for the police officers that have to go out and regulate shit. But honestly, a bunch of kids that don't stand for anything, that are just trying to come up because of whatever excuse they want to make. My thing is, though, at the end of the day, the reason that I'm a little more upset with the cops than I am with the Black Lives Matter is because I expect cops to take the high road and essentially say things like that. Say things like, we understand the whole movement isn't bad, but these bad guys that are part of this movement, we're just as mad at them as you guys are at the bad apples that are in our department, and try and find that middle ground. And I think it's a shame that police officers don't take that higher road to come out and publicly say it. And I think that's a big part of why I was excited to talk to you today. If maybe you could give us some insight as to why more officers aren't saying, we know that a lot of people with this movement have good intention, but the bad ones that are in this movement are making all of y'all look like shit. The same way that I think a lot of the good people that are in this movement speak about police officers in the sense where they're like, these bad cops are fucking making all of you look bad, and they're just tired of all of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, you know, a lot of that falls back on the media, because I have seen quite a few videos where, you know, the protesters and the peaceful protesters for BLM have gone to certain states. And I was one, I don't know what state it was, but the cop was on a microphone or the megaphone. He's like, walk with me, let's walk together.
Yeah.
And all the BLM protesters walk with him. Like, that does happen. There are peaceful BLM and I don't think the message is lost. I think cops will agree. Well, listen, there are your peaceful protesters that, you know, are carrying BLM signs, but there has been so much violence that, like I said, 6 cops were killed in Dallas, and 2 cops were assassinated in East New York. You know, Ramos and Lou, and he was a BLM. It's not a major. It's not all of them, like you said. You know, so I think I'm gonna, to answer your question, I blame the media. Like, maybe they should be showing more of the peaceful protest, the peaceful people carrying the BLM signs. What they're showing a lot is the violence that's going on with the BLM. You know, they're just, so I'm going to blame the media, because even myself knows, like, I have friends that are liberal, that are left wing, and they're saying, listen, you know, because, you know, we always say all lives matter. They're like, what you're missing is the Black Lives Matter that were killed at the hands of the police unjustifiably. And, you know, like I said, with George Floyd, you know, I haven't met a cop, dude. I talk to hundreds of cops, not all the time, but there isn't one cop. I mean, if there is, you know, he's not going to heaven. I'll tell you that. But
Yeah,
didn't
no,
agree.
that was out of control across the board.
That was they couldn't agree more that what he did was wrong. You know, so like we could definitely agree. Well, I'm not saying me and you, but cops can agree that there's probably a lot of good people that they want their voices to be heard for the people who are being killed unjustifiably. Although it's very, very minor. It is. Listen, there's tragedies. You know, Amadou Diallo, 51 shots, taken out the wallet. Like, there's tragedies, man. It does happen. You know, we're human beings, and those cops got to live with that for the rest. They're not proud. They're not like, oh, we killed a guy. Believe me, man. I know plenty of cops have been in shootouts, have killed people justifiably. Friends of mine have been shot, and they're not the same to this day, man. No cop wants to kill anybody. Like, well, I shouldn't say no cop. You know, there has been corrupt cops. Who
No,
knows? Back in
there's
the
definitely
days.
people that want to kill cops. You're 100%
Yeah, man.
right.
You know, it's like, you know, do we really want this war? How do we avoid it? You know, maybe the media needs to show more, you know, maybe more PSA, you know, public service announcements, say, look at this. And I've seen some of them on TV, you know, on the Brooklyn Bridge, where, you know, it was peaceful. When sometimes then you get, like you said, you get a few of those kids come in there and start swinging at cops.
Yeah.
And, you know, you just can't do that, bro. You just can't start hitting cops with sticks. Because, like, when I was a kid, man, if you swung a stick at a cop, I mean, you just can't do that, man. You just
my
gotta,
parents would
you
fuck
know.
me up. If I
Oh,
swung,
bro,
I'd get it worse for my parents than the officer.
I've had cops grab me. I used to say, listen, just put me in jail. Don't even tell my father. You know, like, you just don't even tell my father. But it's different now. I understand that.
I want to touch on what you mentioned, because I do commend that officer that went marching with Black Lives Matter and that actually heard out the people and decided to tell his unit to kind of carry on with them, as opposed to, you know, against them in a sense. Is that the standard in at least your experience with the police department? Because I think that that's really important in any briefings or in anything that's going on now. Do you feel the conversation within the department from the higher ups is, if you see people marching and you feel like it makes sense for you to join them, we encourage you to join them? Because there's been a couple of times where I've been at these protests or I've been at these events, and me specifically, when I speak, I always mention the cops who more times than not are, you know, farther away, posted, you know, removed from where actually everything's going on. And I say, hey, you know, come on stage. I want you to speak to people the same way I'm speaking to people. More times than not, they keep their posts. Is that because it's a policy? Are they encouraged to join people when the situation is safe enough to do so? What's going on with that?
Well, I've seen, and you've probably seen, there was a bunch of chiefs that kneeled with a lot of the protesters. And, you know, they got those cops, they were chiefs and captains. They got a lot of backlash from the cops, because they felt that kneeling was is in hand with the kneel for Colin Kaepernick by kneeling based on the BLM. So, like, a lot of guys were against the kneeling, but, you know, but they tried. I mean, their heart was in the right place. Like, look, we're with you. You know, we understand your pain. But to answer your question, as far as like policy or not, more than likely, you know, if they're being stand on a post, they're not supposed to leave their post. But you know, if the upper echelon says, you know, listen, march with the people. I have seen some videos where cops did march with the people. So I don't know, you know, the answer to that question officially, but I would imagine that based on my past experiences, the upper brass, the upper echelon, you know, with cops are told to march, you know, so many people to follow them, to lead them, and then have some on the sides to protect, you know, maybe the aggravated people that might be throwing stuff at them. So you got a little bit of everything. Some that are with, and some that have to just watch.
All right. Can we agree that it's a shame that, you know, when higher ups are kneeling, when sergeants are kneeling, that other officers would be upset about that and take it as a sign of disrespect as opposed to a sign of connection with the community that they're patrolling?
I look at it like I was against it. I'll be honest with you, Mike, because a lot of it was based on, you know, the kneeling, which was backed by the BLM. You know, when started with Michael Brown. Like we have to know the beginning. Maybe BLM has changed. Like you said, I think we agree. It has
I
now.
mean,
There's some more peaceful people that are like, listen, we're not here. We're not the violent. But it started very violent, and a lot of cops are kind of like, you know, I don't know if I want to say stubborn, but they're pretty patriotic where they're sticking to their beliefs. Where listen, this was based on a hatred towards the cops. The BLM, you know, wasn't the backing, or the people who were backing the BLM were actively killing cops just because they wore a uniform. However, you know, some, like you said, you know, some guys individually might want to bridge that gap, and you know, I can agree with wanting to say, look, maybe we could do something to bring some peace or let everyone see that the BLM is different now. You know, and by taking that kneel might show solidarity. But you know, it's a hard thing to say with, you know.
no, I hear you. I mean, I think that for me is just an expected part of the job is that you should be a little open-minded. But again, that's opinion. When it comes to BLM, I mean, we've already agreed that the same way in the police department, you know, there's bad people as there as well as good people. Going back, and you know, you come from a line of cops. I know for sure throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, growing up, people in my family, my grandmother, be very upset if I ended up with a black girl. My mother would flip out to this day if a black person moved into on our block. You know, I was like, don't sell the house to black people.
Mm.
It's kind of common knowledge at this point that both in the fire department and the police department, as far as hiring black officers, as trying to get black officers on the job, this is something that's very new for the department as far as a priority. And they have been, for lack of a better term, blackballed in a lot of ways, which I think maybe not directly. I don't think a lot of people really look into the detail of it, but perception wise, you know, from being in two situations, I know kids that their father knows exactly what their pay is going to be, the salary, what their pension potentially going to look like, what their vacation time looks like. Where a lot of people that are from the underprivileged communities I've lived in, their parents haven't necessarily had these opportunities and are kind of working twice as hard to hopefully get a job that comes with the health insurance or the pension and things like that. So, I mean, in your opinion, as somebody who's been on the job a long time or that, you know, was on the job for a long time and has family on the job, do you think that some of that aggravation, although not warranted, or I shouldn't say not, you know, I just think some of that aggravation is a little warranted, but it shouldn't, it doesn't justify being acted out on. But do you understand why some of these people might be aggravated?
You're talking about like the community
I,
being aggravated, or cops
I
that are black African American cops.
no, I'm talking the community. I
Yeah,
think the community,
absolutely.
you know, being out of touch because again, you know, growing up, there's a culture in Marine Park where there is that mentality of like you respect the cops, your cousin's a cop, your neighbor's a cop. If you fuck up, they're gonna make sure that your father knows about it, and it's but that culture hasn't necessarily been embedded in the underprivileged Black, Spanish
Right.
communities. And I think
Yeah.
there's a big disconnect with that where the respect isn't there because initially, with things like the hiring, with things like, I don't want you being with that kind of person, it's so culturally embedded into the personalities of some of these people that there is that disconnect. And again, I'm the reason I'm so critical of the cops is just because, not to say they're not good people, but I think it's their responsibility to take the higher road and almost say, you know what, for a long time we were against having black people in the police department, and that's some shit that was built into us from generations before us that didn't understand what we do now. But what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, maybe in the 60s and 70s, of course, there was definitely racism. There was like, I have heard and read stories that, they look down upon black officers or Latino officers. And of course, through evolution, that's changed. Just as a quick note, I had a great career. I've always wanted to be a detective. And one of the reasons that I made the rank of detective was because of my boss at the time, who was a sergeant, who became lieutenant. He's a black guy. I owe my life to him. I don't see him as black. I have a reunion every year, except for this year with COVID. And he always cheers up with glass. He goes, here's to no color, here's to blue, because that's all cops see is blue. Like, so as a side note too, like on Facebook, I have arguments with cops who are black. They were like, George Floyd this, and, arguments over, some questionable shootings. And I would say, listen, let all the facts play out. Oh, you're a racist. I'm like, bro, you're black. The people, in BLM, and I hate to say them all the time, but some of the black communities, the black kids, they don't like you. Because I've seen it. They're calling you Uncle Tom. If you're a cop and you're in blue uniform, you're just blue. So like, you have to know where you stand too. I work with some of the best cops in the world, black, white, but again, my boss, well, he's still black. Let's say he was black. He's still black. We talk all the time. If it wasn't for him, I owe him my life, man. And he did what he did for me. He didn't do it because I was white. He did it because we were blue. But yes, like, there's been training throughout the years, CPR training, how to, culture. And, listen, there were some cops, bro, that come from out of state, like, like Ohio or something, and they become NYPD. And then all of a sudden they're on Tompkins Avenue or Livonia Avenue, and they don't know what the fuck to do. They're in culture shock. So, how do you train them to understand, how a young boy or young girl didn't have the same shot, in society as he did, or maybe I did in Marine Park. Fortunately for me, I hung out in the projects a lot, Sheepshead Bay, Notion houses. I have black cousins. My best friend is Hispanic. I wasn't raised that way. But as a general note for police officers, yes, definitely 60s, 70s. I don't know about the 80s, but, there's been some, racial disparity, not wanting the blacks to be cops. But as far as like what it is now, it's very different. I have, like I said, some friends that are black cops that say, listen, I'm embarrassed that they made the test easier for my people. I took that test like everybody else did. They shouldn't, because they made it a lot easier. They made it free. They made it affordable. They wanted more minorities on the job. And they did what they did to enhance those numbers. But for the people on the street, like the civilians, we call them, I grew up in the street in the city, what I'm saying? So I understood a kid with, statistically single moms, not the father not being around. Statistically, these kids usually end up getting into more trouble than that of someone who has two parents. And, maybe their mother was a prostitute. I've seen it, a crackhead. And these kids grow up tough, man. It's a tough fucking life. And I would see these kids and I understand their anger. I know why they hate the police. They took their mom or dad away. They were arrested while they were young. But again, there's been some training that I think, there's only so much you could do though. I'm like, how much more can you tell cops? You got to be culturally diverse. So you have to understand what a young black kid's going through, what a young Hispanic. Well, then when does it stop? You have Asian now. Now you have Brooklyn's full of Russian.
Everything.
Right. So how much can you teach one cop to learn about culture?
Well,
It's hard, man. It's hard.
I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, it is a culture thing, but I think it's also just a general thing that clearly, I mean, you understand more than a lot of that officers I've come across, because, let me ask you this. I guess if you're with an officer that doesn't necessarily understand how to sympathize with a kid whose maybe mom, was a crackhead, got arrested, or a kid whose dad just ran into trouble and now taught them to hate police, how do you call out an officer that doesn't handle these interactions right? And I'll give my fault. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was saying, I'll give you a quick example. I have a good friend of mine. I was cutting his hair, kid from Marine Park, became a police officer. He was working in one of the houses. I don't know if it was Nostrand or Sheepshead, but it was like 4th of July. Was there, and he's telling me the story as an officer. He says, you know, there was a barbecue that was happening in the projects. They're not supposed to barbecue outside, I guess, for whatever the regulations are. But
Right.
using his discretion, he kind of let them do their thing. Sergeant comes by. I guess something happened there a week earlier. Calls the kid over, who's, you know, inferior to him as far as the ranking, and says,
Yep.
"Why the fuck you letting them barbecue for? Like, what? You know, somebody got killed here the other day. They shouldn't be out here enjoying their time. Clearly, this sergeant now, in my opinion, is doing the wrong thing. Not necessarily because they're not withholding the law as far as barbecuing goes. You know, that's your discretion. But I think that puts the officer that is at his post in a situation where he's allowing the community to do something that I think in turn creates a respect for this officer, not necessarily breaking it up and causing a problem, but rather trying to join them. And now this officer is looked at by the community after they take the barbecue away as like, maybe he called the sergeant, maybe he started something, creating this tension. In a situation like that, what is an officer like this who does have the right mentality, who does understand the community, who found the balance to kind of get along with people and keep the situation, you know, at ease? How do they go about now making sure that that doesn't happen again and again and again?
Well, a lot of times what happens is you heard the term shit rolls downhill. So, and you know, let's say you have this family that, and I see it in Marine Park too sometimes. It's people barbecue. I know it's illegal. I see it. I say, oh, hopefully they'll clean up because that's going to bring attention to themselves. You know what I mean? If they clean up, everything's good. The cops will say, listen, they're peaceful, they're quiet, they clean up. Now, number one, it's very possible someone who lives in the building is going to complain, whether it be noisy or, oh, listen, I tried that once and they didn't let me, so why should they? They call 911, they call the precinct. The captain tells the lieutenant tells the sergeant tells the cop, who just 20 minutes ago said, hey, guys, thanks for the hot dog. God bless you. Have a great day. And now he's got to shut the place down. You know, there's community affairs officers in each precinct. You know, the cop can maybe go to the community affairs officer and say, look, we need to come to some agreement. You know, maybe the unions can get involved with it. Cop has a union delegate, talk to the sergeant's union, say, you know, you're telling this cop to shut it down, but the cop has a good voice with the people and there's been no problems. Why are you telling, you know, even with the captain? You know, I mean, I don't know, like what the open door policy is, but, you know, when I was a cop, you didn't talk to the captain. But now it might be a little bit more open-minded where you could go in, open door policy and say, hey, Cap, I just want to let you know, you know, the other day, you know, Bachelder Street, there was a barbecue and the sergeant made me shut it down. They're not really, it was quiet and peaceful. They weren't doing anything. You know, and maybe the captain might tell the sergeant, hey, listen, let it go. The cop, that's the cop's beat. Let him handle his beat, you know. So unfortunately, you know, again, shit rolls downhill. Like the cop on a Monday is a hero. He's telling everybody, have a great day. I'm not going to shut it down. And all of a sudden, Tuesday, the sergeant comes and he's got to follow orders. So he has no choice. But again, maybe he can open up his mouth, tell the lieutenant, tell the sergeant, the captain, talk to community affairs and say, you know, the sergeant's telling me to shut these parties down and they're really having a good time. It's been uneventful. There's nobody getting shot. They clean up. You know, speak to the community affairs and the leaders, have the councilman involved. There's definitely ways that it can get, because they have meetings at the precinct, like usually the first Tuesday of every month. And they could come there and say, look, we're just having a good time. Why do you guys keep shutting us down? Maybe the captain doesn't know the sergeant's doing it. And there needs to be more maybe of a communication, you know, amongst officers so that they can prolong these events as long as everyone's happy and having a good time.
Are there systems in place for an officer like that to, you know, say something, for lack of a better word, snitch on a captain that they feel that is not doing a good job, or a sergeant, or whatever the ranking may be, where the backlash isn't coming? Or is there always a risk of some backlash for essentially trying to do what the right thing in that officer's opinion is?
You know, back in my days, like you would call it, you're going over his head. Like, I don't know who you would call. It's not corruption. If there's corruption, obviously you know, a cop would call internal affairs.
Yeah.
And there's no backlash. Maybe many years ago there was. You get great label of snitch, a rat, and they start messing with you, start fucking with you, they transfer you, whatever. But like something like that's going on, I think that could be easily, peacefully rectified through just communication with like a local community board, members, have the people who are having these, maybe there's a leader there that runs it, and just say, look, can we continue to do this? We know it's illegal. We know it, but we're not doing anything wrong. It's peaceful. Because like I said, I have seen it. I've seen it in my years where you look into the park, a big sign, no barbecuing, no trespassing, and we just keep driving. They're having a good time. You know what I mean? But there's always going to be that one guy that might turn around. And again, maybe based on a 911 call by a disgruntled person who they got shut down. So like I said before, oh, how come they having a party and I can't? And now the sergeant's got to say, listen, I'm sorry, you got to shut you down. But I don't know that, like I said, can a cop go above a captain's head? I don't think that's necessary. I think there's too many avenues to go down to have it rectified in a peaceful, an agreement. Everyone could agree or disagree, and then maybe sit down with the people and say, well, I'm sorry, but we can't do it anymore for these reasons, and then at least let them know. Education is important, man. Information, communication, it's huge. I think that's the problem here is a lot of people aren't being, cops too. I mean, there's like a discourse there. There's no communication. So much hatred now. It's like, it's just the simplest thing sets people off. It's, we've gone back quite a few years with all this hatred,
I mean,
it's terrible.
I think some of it, even though, I mean, hatred is definitely strong. I don't think anybody should hate anybody, but I think some of the frustrations are so warranted, man. Like, even in the smallest circumstances, to be honest, I've always been very frustrated with even the smallest things, like police that'll double park and go get coffee, or police that'll like block a lane, or do these little things that I think show a lack of respect for, I've seen countless cops that are talking on the phone and driving, and then next thing you know, you see in these signs, 6 points if you talk on the phone and driving. And it feels like there's a double standard to some extent. Are police talked to ever about not doing these things? And if they do some of these things that create this horrible perception of them in the community, how are they rectified?
Yes, they are. But to bring up the cell phone, as far as last I heard, driving while on the phone, law enforcement is exempt from that. They're allowed to do that. Like I think even firemen and EMS, like emergency first responders, they're allowed to talk on the phone. It's crazy, I know, because they're flying down the street, they're on the phone. It sounds nuts, but I think for the majority of them, they're usually they're allowed to do that. So until that, if enough people complain, and maybe they get stopped. But until then, it's legal. But as far as double parking, and that was something that was a pet peeve of mine, even as a rookie. We had this with training called CPR. You see it on the side of police car, community policing and respect. We had training, verbal judo, and they were like, the double parking, or you hit the whoop siren. The guy in the bus stop, you tell him to move just so you could have the spot and run in and get a soda. Like, I would be embarrassed by stuff like that, or you would double park and cops would be talking to each other and you're causing traffic. Like, if I did that and a car beeped, like, I would move, I would be against. So there are a lot of cops that, don't like that because it's a bad image, but now, could they get in trouble? Sure. I mean, the sergeant could pull up and say, what are you doing? Move your car. It does show a lack of professionalism when they do stuff like that. That I agree with. Double parking, blocking traffic, unless it's an emergency situation, they're blocking a hydrant or a bus stop. But if they're just getting coffee, if they're being quick, listen, let them go get their coffee, jump in the car. But if they're, causing traffic or, blocking somebody's driveway and then giving them an attitude, that's an asshole. You know what I mean? I'm sure guys do it, but I'm embarrassed by that.
No, and again, I appreciate you, man, because I feel like your professionalism has been on the up and up, and I wish I saw more of that coming from a lot of officers.
Thank you.
I gotta say, I watched the other day. It was the police union. It was Pat Lynch, and then Rudy Giuliani and Trump were talking in a room. And I'm very big. I don't really get into the politics because I just believe overall government is pretty fucked up. But one thing that struck me with that particular conference was Giuliani starts going. He says, my cousin Timmy was a cop, my uncle Jimmy was a cop, and my cousin Tim was a fireman. And a lot of officers were booing, right? Which is obviously, I mean, the firemen, I know there's a rivalry forever, whether it's in the Garden when they do their games every year or whatever it might be, it's police versus firemen. I don't necessarily knock the cops for that, but I feel like as somebody who's a leader of the city, as a Giuliani, for example, who was actually speaking at the time, to not then say, you know what, these are your brothers, they died in 9/11 also, there's no reason that you should not be on the same page on the up and up with them. Do you feel like, as somebody who's been on the job, that the oversight above the captains and lieutenants, the people that are actually doing the funding, the people that are actually responsible, I think, to make sure that everything is kind of positioned, that policy is put together in a certain way, do you think that they take the time to talk with police officers or the leaders in police about what could be better? Or do you think they kind of leave it up to individuals, and in turn, in my opinion, you know, leave that open door for certain precincts to have a certain culture that's not necessarily productive?
Well, my experience between, I've had, my uncle's a fireman too, and like as a young cop, there was always a place that you can go to relax, get a good meal. Was always the firehouse. I've heard like the fights throughout the years. I've never seen it, but I've heard from both sides, you know. And you just shake your head because I've always been treated so well by firemen, and you know, and I pulled over firemen, you know, and, oh, how you doing? Oh, you're a fireman. Have a good day, like, you know. And I know cops that used to write summonses to firemen's cars as they're parked on the sidewalk in front of firehouse. And that's the guy whose locker would get flipped. Like, you don't do that. We're all, especially after 9/11 too. Like, I didn't see it. It was so much love after that. And you know, a lot of fire trucks are have the police flag on them now. But there is that, you know, like, again, I haven't seen it. I still hear about it, but for some reason, it still always seems to be the underlying, you know, little beef between cops and firemen. And you know, I don't know why. I mean, I do know why, because I've heard stories, you know, cops, let's say cops respond to a car accident scene, right? And the firemen get there. They both almost have the same tools to open, like the jaws of life. And, you know, some cops would have an ego. They got there first. It's their job. And cops would say, listen, this is not a fire. You don't belong here. Like, that's fucked up. Like, let's work together. You know what I mean? I have heard firemen too tell cops, you know, cops running burning buildings, and the fireman would say, you know, what the fuck are you doing? Get out of my way. And he's right though too. Like he's got the equipment, you know, go up there and fight that fire. And then cops would, you know, firemen would be mad at cops for getting there. Maybe they were blocking the hydrant. You know, it's like small things over the years that there's always that, like you said, it's kind of like, you know, it's low down there that there's animosity. But for the most part, I think, you know, even like 99.9% of cops and firemen have love for each other, and definitely there is a brotherhood. So many firemen are ex-cops too. It's a better job. It's one of the best jobs in the world, if you ask me. So they become firemen, and then, you know, they tell the other firemen, hey, knock it off, we're all together. And, you know, will it ever stop? Probably not. There's probably will always be a slight animosity. But like I said, 99.9% of the time, you know, there's love. But the unions, you know, they put out messages. I've seen them before, like the union leaders have written letters. It's on Twitter to fire department, to truck or engine number, thanks for your help, and vice versa. So I have been seeing a lot of with social media, the love for each other is being public, you know, being put out there publicly. But like we've never been told by bosses, you're going to like firemen, you're going to hate them. It was never told to us. It was just, like you said, maybe like you just understood each other's need by the public and the dangers that you face, and you better have each other's back, because if not, you know, you fucking die. You know what I mean? You know, you die, bro. It's like no other way to say it.
I have two more questions for you. I guess both yes and no questions. If you have somebody from Black Lives Matter that hates all the cops blindly, hasn't had the productive conversations, would you say they're being a bad activist?
I'd say, yeah, like you said, be open-minded, man. Talk to me. Why do you hate cops so much? Let's talk. You know what I mean?
If you have a police officer that is against Black Lives Matter and isn't speaking about the individuals but the whole, would you say they're a bad police officer?
No, I wouldn't say, yeah, you know what? I wouldn't say bad so much, but at the same time, I'd say be open-minded, because there are, like, you know, we both seen like a social media that there are people who, and, you know, listen, I'm not going to say they're all misguided, but some of them have a right to be angry. And so I wouldn't say he's a bad police officer, because to me, the definition of a bad police officer is someone I wouldn't want to work with. But someone who might be misinformed, maybe we could change his mind. Just like I wouldn't say the BLM is bad. You know, let's be open-minded. Let's talk. Open-minded communication. Have a sit down and let's talk about why. You know, like debates can be very ugly, man. You got to be willing to listen. And again, like growing up in the streets, it definitely helped me maintain a good relationship with guys I've locked up on the streets that would see me. I used to see guys in Bay Ridge, yo, shook my hand. Thanks for treating me right, man. Appreciate that. Like, you know, for most part, bro, most cops are good. Believe me, I worked with some fucked up dudes, you know, but you know, we got to try and put that, you know, that small-mindedness aside and open our minds and say, listen, you know, you belong to BLM. What are your, but we know, you know, what are your beefs? Like I said, we know, meaning some people who have been killed by police unjustified. I think it was one in South Carolina where the cop just opened up on this guy's back, fucking killed him. Like, that was like, oh, you know, like, you know, BLM, rightfully so, man. You know what I mean? But the cops, wouldn't say they were bad. I just say maybe they need to be educated, maybe open, keep your mind open as to why or what their concerns or anger is about. Maybe we can come to a medium and understand.
See, but me, and you know, this I guess brings the conversation full circle. I just feel like, you know, with the job title, if you're not being open to it because you're aggravated, maybe even rightfully so. And listen, at the end of the day, we're all people. But would you say that maybe that officer is not necessarily in a place or built to do this job at this particular time, with letting things like that aggravate them on a personal level, as opposed to completely being unbiased to it and saying, you know what, this situation isn't representative of the whole group the same way that this particular situation isn't representative of our whole group?
Yeah, you got to be thick-skinned, man. You know, you got to be like, so just real quick, one video I seen, I forget what state it was, but a woman was in the cop's face like that, screaming. And like, first of all, I thought I made it a law where you can't harass cops. I don't know, some states have removed it or they didn't implement it yet. But like, you have to maintain this, like, as a cop, because your weapons and stuff, maintain a safe distance. Like, I would never let anyone get that close to me. But if you're gonna stand away from me and curse at me, tell me you hate me, you want to burn my house down, I'm just gonna look at you. You have to be thick-skinned. You know, like, once you breach that zone of safety, it's on, because it's just, that's it now. Now you've just invaded my personal space and yours. So, you know, so to answer your question is that, yeah, maybe this job ain't for everybody. Maybe this cop was so close-minded and angry. Maybe it's not for him. Maybe you should go back to what you were doing before, whatever it was, or choose another job, because, you know, it's a calling. You take an oath. You have to protect the Constitution. If somebody wants to burn that flag, you may not like it, but you got to let it happen. You know, there are some ways you can, if you're, you know, you can go with disorderly conduct, but, you know, in today's day and age where people are acting out and you know, just getting their venting, you have to be able to take that. You got to be thick-skinned. Again, this is a calling. You took an oath, you know, to upstand, what do you call it, protect the rights of the people and property. Yeah, you got to be able to take it. Otherwise, then it's not for you.
Do you think police go through adequate training? Because I'll say a lot of the friends I have that have become police officers, I don't think they're necessarily built for it, in the sense of some of the neighborhoods I've lived in. I've seen a lot of death. I've seen a lot of situations where parents, exactly like you said, they do drugs, they're into all this shit. And I think that's what's kind of given me a thick skin over the years, where it's like, you know, I could really see both sides of the spectrum and say, you know what, even though this fucking person is talking crazy, because I get it in radio. As a white kid that's in radio, man, from Marine Park, you'd be surprised how many people that are black, that are Spanish, are just like, oh, you're Rosenberg's cousin probably, or some shit. They have no idea how hard I work to get in my position. But, you know,
Right.
I'm able to kind of brush it off. I don't let it frustrate me, but it took a while. Do you think that there's adequate training for a new officer that's on the job that might have experienced Marine Park, but not experienced, you know, Brownsville, and is now in this situation where they might be post out there, you know, they might be in the 7-3, 7-5, and, you know, not necessarily be prepared for that? Do you think there is an adequate training system in place with the NYPD to actually get these kids prepared for some of these circumstances? Or do you think they're getting sent in a little blind?
No, I don't think you could ever train somebody enough to you know, be prepared for what they're about to see. As far as like what you said, like a kid, you know, let's say a white kid from Marine Park or Staten Island, all of a sudden is in the 7-3. You know, or you know, like I said, from Ohio, I've had cops. They come here and they're in Tompkins Avenue. I mentioned it before, and their head spin. They're afraid. They were afraid. It's not for everybody, man. Like, you know, I don't know what the numbers are, but there's quite a few cops. Like, when you get sworn in, by third day, like, it's a paramilitary organization. This guy's screaming. At least when it's a little softer now, I understand. But when I was a cop, 1992, bro, these guys screamed in your face. They cursed at you. No, the instructors, like they toughened you up, man.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was never a tough kid growing up, but I wasn't a pussy. You know what I mean? I had my share of fights. I hung out with some pretty tough kids. So, you know, I had the street experience. But like you said, you know, I don't think they could train anybody enough that might not have been exposed to rough neighborhoods that, like you said, because the academy 6 months, like you said, 6 months in, they graduate rather, and they're on, you know, they're in the 7.5, and you know they might be, and they quit, Mike. Like so, so just to add to what you were asking is that some guys do quit. Why? They're just not prepared for it. Now the training that NYPD does is one of the best training in the nation. As a matter of fact, so many police departments come to NYPD to learn shit. And we do others like LA, the Oklahoma bombing. If you remember that, you know, we sent a lot of bomb professionals guys down there to learn from them, and they did us after 9/11. So it is one of the best trained police department. You know, they do try to introduce, at least when I went through with social science, I don't know what they call it now, and they call it culture shock, as to when you arrive on a scene and you know, I've been in cases, Mike, where a guy smacked his wife, and she called somebody else called 911. We got there, and the guy came out, he was all mad, and we spoke to the wife. She had a shiner. So he said, "What the hell happened?" "Oh, he smacked me." So we said, "You're under arrest, you know, domestic violence. You can't walk away from that." He's like, "What do you mean?" I don't know what country he came from. I don't remember, but he's like, "Where I come from, it's legal." So he was, so for me, like I wasn't taught that in the
Yeah.
academy. You know, like, you know, some cultures, these guys are allowed to smack their wives. Like, but we're not there now, bro. We're in America, and you're getting locked up. And this poor woman's like, she's probably getting beat her whole life, you know. But so again, you know, like as far as training, and they would teach us some of that in social science. Like I said, certain cultures you get to, there might be a language barrier, or in some cultures, you're not allowed to talk to the wife. Like I think it's a lot with Asian Pacific. Like if you look at the wife, that's a sign of disrespect. You're supposed to talk to the man. I don't know if they teach that now. They didn't when I was in the academy, but you know, there's so many cultures, Mike. You know, Brooklyn's a big fucking place, man. But again, after day one, hundreds drop. They quit just from getting screamed at. They quit. 6 months later, they're in East New York and they're scared shit, and they go back to fucking wherever they came from. So probably not enough training to deal with that, I have to say. But you know, physical training, how to use your gun, to know the law. Yeah, you know, there's only that's still, you know, of course, being taught. But as far as being prepared for what they're gonna see, you know, like for me, bro, I came on in '92. The World Trade Center original bombing was '93. We didn't see anything. I've had some really bad. I've seen people at their worst, stuff I won't tell my children. And then 9/11 happened. I did about 6 months in the morgue carrying body parts. I was in the landfill carrying body. I've seen a lot of shit, man. And you know what? I've had some nightmares. I lost some sleep. There was no training to prepare us for that, bro. You know what I mean? So you got to go with the flow, man. Just got to hope the job's for you, but it's not for everybody. And, you know, so that's really all I could say about that.
Nah, I think you made a lot of good points with that, man. And honestly, I would suggest to anybody watching this that does have the authority. I think that what you said about the training, as far as they used to yell in your face, I think that'll help break a lot of people in, and not necessarily just the yelling in your face, but having people from different backgrounds, different cultures be in positions where they have the authority to do the training, so that you're not just getting trained by a guy who's been on the job for X amount of time because his family's been on the job and he followed in footsteps, but also some new people who may be, you know, maybe people from the military, maybe people that are from different backgrounds that can sympathize more with these neighborhoods and take a kid that's from Marine Park and explain to him the same way that I explained to him. Listen, you know, you're going into a neighborhood where a lot of these people don't fuck with you, but this is how you have to carry yourself, and get familiar with where people eat, get familiar with where people hang out, you know, and really embed yourself in the community that you're patrolling, so that there is that mutual respect.
Yeah, because you could always learn while you're there. Like I said, I'm from Marine Park. I was born in Park. I was in Red Hook, bro. I don't know if you know, Red Hook was a pretty rough neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I was a young kid. I was 20 years old, but I just knew what to do to a certain degree. Like look for the bad guys. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot from certain, certain blocks I was on, certain residents I visited, family. Like you talk to people. Like sometimes you just learn. Like maybe now, you know, I could say, "Excuse me, sir. I apologize." You could say you're sorry, man. Like the generation I came from was like cops never said they were sorry. Like I learned that on my own. It's like I handcuffed the wrong guy, you know, and like rough and tough cop, you're like, just get the fuck out of here. Now, like I would say, listen, I apologize, man. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I put the cuffs on you. I was wrong. And you'd be surprised how far that goes, man.
A
And
long way.
some guys, that goes along. I mean, I've done it plenty of times. I'm not saying like I beat the shit out of a guy and let him go. Like, no. If I ever fought a guy, it was because he fought me, was resisting arrest. It's a crime. You can't resist arrest. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe someone pointed out the wrong guy. He had his day in court. He probably sued, got some money. You know, you got to handle that shit in court, man. But like a lot of stuff, like I said, you know, you would respond to a family dispute. You separate the family. Hey, let's go. What's going on here? First of all, you know, I apologize. You know, some people want you to take your shoes off. You can't do that. You know, your shoes are part of uniform. So you might say, I apologize. I cannot remove my shoes, you know, but you'll learn that over time, man. You know, there's no, like I said, you can't teach all that, but you'll learn it over time. You know, whether you're from Marine Park or Bed-Stuy, you know, I know a lot of cops that came from the projects, bro, and they were great cops. They made it far. They made it up to rank a chief, and they're a good example for the kids that live there. Say, look, I came from the ghetto, man. I came from the inner city. I came from the projects. Look where I am now. You know, a lot of that's going on too, and that's a positive message, is to show a lot of that happens.
You know, before we wrap, a personal question. Why do you think I'm having such a hard time talking to officers that are on the job? Because I say every freaking walk of life, I have a guy that does digital marketing that's like, can you interview me? Janitors that are like, can you interview me? And I've been trying to talk to cops for the past 3 weeks. When I post something that's even the slightest bit critical, that, you know, my comments blow up with officers and their families that are like, no, this isn't the case but then when I actually want to have the conversation and get on exactly how we did today, which I super appreciate, and I think you're a great example of what a good officer is.
Thank you.
But, you know, why do you think I'm having such a hard time with that? And why do you think more police officers aren't taking the time to talk to media, to talk to, you know, the public, the same way that, like, when COVID hits, you know, you'll see a nurse pop up at a hospital and say, we're under equipped and I don't care if my bosses know it. You know, I think if the case is that the majority of cops aren't bad apples, that there's a lot of good cops out there, why not have more of them publicly say, you know what, Black Lives Matter isn't a bad movement, but there's a lot of bad people in that, the same way there's a lot of bad people in our situation.
Well, I could say one thing is that you know, the media, I guess it's the media, man. The media really has the us against them mentality. And all cops want to do, bro, is go home. They want to live. And what you're seeing on TV and what might be happening in real life, two different things, but they're really actively killing cops. And it shows that it's coming from, you know, and they're not BLM, like these rioters and stuff, they might be shouting it out, but I think the majority of them, they're not BLM. They're just, you know, it's from what I read too, they're paid activists. They're not even from here. They're coming in, they're burning buildings down, they're beating up cops. So it gets to be a point where, and I'll answer your question, is our leadership, I say I'm not a cop anymore, but the leadership of the police department haven't really stuck by the guys that have really been, guys are getting bricks over their head. They've been told to stand down, you know, and not do their job. And so you're not going to get a happy cop these days, man. They're very cynical, and they have a right to be, man, because they're up echelon. You know, the mayor, they're not backing them. They're not backing. He's like you said, you know, not all cops are bad. You know, so many of them are good, Mike. And maybe I'm a little biased, but like you look at statistics,
I agree.
man.
I think,
you know,
there's just as many good cops as there are in Black Lives Matter, honestly, man. I've met, like I said, plenty of cops that I think are great people. I think the difference is when we look at cops, we don't necessarily look at them as people all the time. We hold them to a higher standard than we hold the average person.
As you should. Yeah,
well,
as you should.
I mean, it sounds like we can't to some extent, to be honest, man, because it's just the circumstances are not necessarily in their favor. And, you know, as much as we would like to, I think as much as we would like to say, you know what, it is just a couple of guys that are double parking. It's a couple of guys that are, you know, speaking on the movement. But like you said, if the supervisors aren't standing next to the good guys because of whatever reason, whether it be the politics or otherwise, I think it puts everybody at odds, because essentially, you know, you're going to take what you see and you're going to react accordingly. And the same way that the media is portraying Black Lives Matter, on a lot of the networks that the cops are tuned into on this is protests and rioting, this isn't protesting, this is rioting. And if on the flip side, like I'll keep it 100 because fuck the media, you know, if Fox is showing a lot of officers, this is what Black Lives Matter is, and then you have CNN showing a lot of Black Lives Matter, this is what cops are, you can't expect there to be productive conversation. And I guess, I mean, I'll ask again, for me personally, I mean, and I hope that this opens up the door for a lot more officers to not necessarily, you know, to come talk to me. I'm a dude that's part of the media. I've been on the biggest radio station in the world. And I'm trying to talk to officers completely unbiased. I really want to try and connect people. I really want people to understand, you know, a day in the life of you guys as much as you guys understand a day in the life of the people that are out here really suffering and hurting because they're seeing the one side of what happens in the departments. At the end of the day, I just still, I find it so hard, man, to not, you know, as much as some of these kids aren't equipped and they shouldn't be cops, they're still becoming cops. And there's still a problem that needs to be fixed from the top down. But I mean, I think you made a lot of good points, man. And ultimately what it boils down to is you're 100% right. I think the media, the way that they don't connect people and rather tear people apart, I think the politicians are also doing that. And I've said it a lot. I think the Democrats, the Republicans, it's like you go to any other country, if the government's fucking up, everybody's mad at the government. It doesn't matter what side you're on. Like, you know, and I think the government's agenda to kind of keep things a little bit more separate so that they have control and can say, you know what, this is the guy that's going to get the police vote. This is the guy that's going to get the teacher vote. This is the guy that's caused a lot of the issues too. And I think everybody's at odds, man.
But I owe you an apology. What I meant to say, when you had said before that that cops should be looked up to as a higher standard, and I said as you should. What I meant to say was that cops are held to a higher standard, as they should, and that's actually not that you should look up to. I don't want to apologize for that misunderstanding, because that's actually in I believe it's in the oath, is that we have a higher standard of integrity that is generally expected in others, and that we're supposed to be held to a higher standard. And that's what I meant before, not to say that you should, because listen, however you, like as a kid, we were taught like you should respect the police. Like that, I'll definitely stand by. You should respect the police, and and do what they say. Like and so many of these, these incidents can be so easily have been not have happened had they just complied. Like with me, I get pulled over, bro. My hands are on my steering wheel, my lights are on, and they pull up. like. Especially if you're committing a crime too, like bro, back in the days, you ran from the police, like I said, you caught a beating. Like nowadays, like, this guy, and I have to go back to that got tased and, he tried to reach into his car. Like everyone says, like even black guys I know, cops, like, guy should just put his hands up. Should he have deserved to die? Of course not, man. You got to be the devil if you think that. But, sometimes we got to say, like, you have to respect the police, like, especially if you're doing wrong. Like 911 was called on him. He got tased. My hands are going in the air, bro. I'm jumping on the floor. I'm not going into a car where my kids are, risk my kid's life. Like, we could dissect a lot of these incidents, but, we're held to a higher standard of integrity. We need to be, maybe we could always take training. We never say no to training, but there's only so much you can do to train. There's only so much you can do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just as equally as money should go towards training, I think money should go towards letting kids in these communities know. Because honestly, I didn't hear about roll down on the windows, turn the lights on, and put your hands on the steering.
100%.
I didn't hear about that until I was in Marine Park, and I didn't hear it from a cop. I heard it from a cop off duty from just being around. Here's how you handle it. But it's not something that I think is a standard and that's communicated across the board for people to understand how some of these interactions need to take place and where that respect could be drawn. If you tell kids in the hood, listen, if you do come across a cop, put your hands on the steering wheel, roll down all the windows, turn the lights on, and it'll make them more comfortable. If that's something that I think they get to hear officers say, it would go a long way,
100.
Again, I got to ask you again, man, why do you think a lot of cops don't want to talk to me? Because
listen, like I said,
or if
man,
you know that would, I would love to talk to some guys that are on the job.
I haven't seen I don't follow you, so I haven't seen what you were writing, but sometimes it's better to talk in person. Like what you're writing may be what they see is inflammatory to them, because it's been such us against them mentality, and because of the media too, and the cops are actively getting killed and shot, and a lot of them are BLM members, and like you said, not all of them are bad, but some that are. So there's that instant like, it just becomes cynical, the instant hatred. So when someone writes, hey, BLM's not so bad, a cop's getting inflamed by that. That's probably why they don't want to talk to you, man. They probably see you as someone who's maybe more, I'm assuming, more sympathetic to BLM than the cops. That's the only thing I
I
can
hear
think
you.
of,
Well,
That's the only thing I can think of.
I say this, man. I'm grateful to have your time today, and I'm glad that there are guys like you that are holding some of these guys that have that, in my opinion, more ignorant mentality to a higher standard. Because I do think it's really important for people to get that in BLM there's a couple bad people, but the majority are good, and the same with the police. I think it's a couple of bad people, but the majority are good, and I think just as much as BLM should hold the rioting to a standard, I'm glad that there's guys like you that are going to hold these other guys that are looking at BLM as a whole as a horrible thing to a higher standard in their own right, man. But
Got it.
thank you so much. Again, if you know any officers that are on the job that are down to have productive conversation, I don't think there could be enough of it. I'd be willing to have everybody I possibly can, because I think the more people that are from some of these underprivileged neighborhoods I've lived in that get to see people that are like my friends' fathers and uncles and people in Marine Park that are good-hearted, it could only be good for the conversation, and hopefully it could be a small piece of bringing the city back together. And I want to see everyone get along, man. Honestly, I don't want.
Yeah, I hear you. Me too.
Even with the defunding, I mentioned real quick. I listen to a lot of the Joe Rogan podcasts, and I think
Yeah,
that
me too.
he's got a great point, man. I don't think that the defunding is necessarily a solution. I don't want to see social workers trying to handle crime. I
They
really think
can't
that.
do it, man. They can't do it.
Yeah, but I'll say this. I know a lot of kids, man, that they get just physically fit enough to pass the test, and then they're not held to that standard throughout their careers. And, I think that that's something that maybe even put more funding towards, to spend more time training, to get to a point where maybe it's 6 months to initially get in, but, pay these kids to be able to spend some time training. You don't have to just pay them when they're on the street or when they make an arrest. A lot of times, they make arrests and they got to sit around the precinct and do stuff anyway. Let's incorporate some more training to really be able to get more involved with all different cultures. The same way that I think, a lot of kids should watch cop movies that are in the underprivileged hoods and watch interviews exactly like this. I think that
Right.
there's a lot of officers that need to start getting more submerged into hip hop culture, into the motion picture culture. Like, there's a lot of movies that represent Black culture very well, and I think over time we could appreciate each other more and weed out a lot of this bad bullshit to where they're uncomfortable again and actually see that there's an issue within themselves.
I like to see that happen, man. I like to see that happen.
Well, thank you so much, man, for being part of the change and for being productive and having the conversation today. I've been looking forward to it for a while.
I appreciate the opportunity, Mike.
Much love, man. Stay blessed.
Right, yeah.
And again, hope we talk soon. If you know anybody, I'd love to talk to them.
You got it.
All right. Cheers. Thank you.
Later. Take care, brother.